Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast. My name is Joey Schultz and I'm joined as always by my fantastic co-hosts. First up, he loves a huge mana curve. It's Matt Morgan.
I got yelled at. I was on vacation in Hawaii and I was laughing very loudly. They said, that's not allowed. We only allow aloha.
I like that. I really like that. Sometimes, Matt, you take me on a journey, and I like that the journey you took me on was to Hawaii. That makes me happy.
It was very tropical, and I'm glad that it was a slow burn, but it caught up to you, and I'm glad for it.
So good. Oh, that's one of my favorite intro jokes ever. Up next, he loves to play with our friend Chase, aka Mana Curves. That's Dana Roach.
So when this show airs, we have about 7 weeks until Kaldheim spoilers start, which is the longest gap we've had in like the last year. So I think we probably can just go on vacation now, I think, until then, and just punch out. Is that something we can do? Is that an option?
Are you saying going on vacation while everyone's brewing with Commander Legends cards?
I mean, if not now, when?
All right, you know what? Fair enough. Anyway, this is the EDHRECast. EDHREC is the best deck building resource on the web for the Commander format, compiling data from deck lists all over the internet to provide helpful recommendations for new Commander decks. And here on the podcast, what we like to do is give all that data a little more context. Hey, Matt, what is it that we are talking about this week?
We are going to talk about those mana curves, and we're going to talk specifically about the commanders with the highest mana curves currently in the format.
That we are. This is sort of part 1 of 2. We're going to take a look at the commanders that have the highest mana curves in this episode. And the next episode, we'll be taking a look at the commanders with the lowest mana curves, the lowest average CMC among all of their decks. So it should be really, really fun to see what commanders are swinging with the biggest and the 9 drops and the 10 drops. And then also the commanders that are, sitting down there with a bunch of 1 drops in their deck too. But before we get to our topic today, we want to give a huge thank you to Josh Lee Kwai and the entire team at the Command Zone podcast. They handle all of the post-production work on our cast and make it look as awesome as it does. So thank you so much. And of course, we want to give a thank you to our sponsors for the show too.
Yeah, we are sponsored by Card Kingdom and TCG Player. Card Kingdom has a fantastic buy list if you have unused cards you want to part with, and use that store credit to buy new cards like this Aetherflux Reservoir I have right here in hand that I just got in today. We are also sponsored by TCG Player, which has a ridiculously deep list of individual sellers who can get you any card in any condition that you would ever possibly want. So just go to EDHREC and click on the card in question and follow the link below to the site of your choice. Doing so supports both the site and the show.
Or if you would like to skip all that, you don't need to purchase any cards. You can support us directly by going to patreon.com/EDHRECast. We have all sorts of patron tiers available for whatever you're looking to get out of it, and we appreciate all the support you give us, whether it's joining the Discord, hanging out, telling some dad jokes there, or say you want to listen to the episodes a day early. We have a tier for that as well. We even have a tier for shouting out a patron every single week because we do appreciate all the support. So Kate Hopkins, thank you so much for your support. We appreciate it, and thank you for still supporting us, even though I didn't bring you anything back from my vacation to Hawaii, where I learned all about proper laughing etiquette.
Oh, no. Thank you so much for the support. And actually, I kind of want to go back a quick thing. Dana, did you just say that you got a new Aetherflux Reservoir? I have to ask, what is it that you're planning on doing that? Because I feel threatened.
I think I'm probably going to spend 50 life and deal 50 damage to one of you two more often than not.
Well,
I'm going to make sure that I keep a redirect or some type of effect to make sure it doesn't hit me, I guess.
I mean, as long as Dana does it on twitch.tv/EDHRECast, I don't mind what he does with it.
Well done, Matt, with the plugs. All right, let's get now to our main topic. We are talking about the highest mana curves in EDH, the commanders that have the highest on average converted mana cost among their stuff. There's a couple of caveats, I guess, about how we drew this data that we want to quickly get out of the way before we hop right in. So, as always, with all of our episodes, when we're looking at top 10s or top 5s or anything like that, the most popular commanders, we're only going to be talking about the commanders that have over 100 decks to their name, because commanders that only have 2 decks to their name. It doesn't matter if they're playing a whole bunch of 10 drops. No one's really playing them. So we're not going to be talking about any commanders that aren't popular enough above that particular threshold. And then the other thing that we want to mention is that all of this data was drawn in sort of mid-November of 2020, and we use the average deck feature on EDHREC to get the average deck and then average out the mana costs that we find there. So that is how we are getting all of this data to see which commanders have those really high average mana costs so that we can see which ones are slugging around with the huge 8 drops and huge 9 drops and stuff like that. And I have a slight suspicion that, Matt, it might be a lot of your decks. Just a theory.
Yeah, it would not surprise me as we get through this list that there are several of my decks that are going to make their way into this list. But one thing we do want to make sure that we point out too is give some context to the numbers that we're going to go over. We're going to throw around a lot of numbers, but if you don't understand what they mean, it's not really going to help. So when we say there's a CMC of a certain commander, we're going to talk about the average converted mana cost of all the spells and all basically non-lands in that commander's deck. So if we say Muldrotha has an average CMC of 2.92, it's not because Muldrotha the Gravetide actually costs 2.92 mana. That's very wrong. It's because the average mana cost of the spells in the deck evens out to 2.92 converted mana cost. We're also going to measure how many cards with a CMC of 6 or greater might be in any given deck. Muldrotha only has 2, for example, which means there's a lot of low-cost spells in the deck to bring that average down to that 2.92.
Similarly, something like Golgolth Tireless Pilgrim has an average CMC of 3.6, which is significantly higher than what you have with Muldrotha's 2.92. And then when you kind of break down that cards at CMC 6 or higher, you're looking at 12 in a Golgolth deck, which makes sense given the average CMC being 3.6. So as you can kind of see, it's not really a scale of 1 to 10. We're operating on a scale kind of 2 to 6. And obviously, the more high CMC cards in the deck, the higher the average CMC is.
Yeah, that's just it. Like, there's not going to be a commander where the average converted mana cost across the deck is going to be like an 8 or something. That just doesn't exist. But there's also, it's never going to approach 1 or 0 either, because there is so much actually going on in a commander's deck. And it's kind of cool to see that there is that difference between the commanders that have that average mana cost at 3 or something, but then they might have a whole lot of expensive cards that bring it up because their strategy, Dana, like you mentioned with Golos, can cast free spells. So you want a good number of high cost stuff, but then also a whole lot of low cost stuff to help you ramp into those potentially as well. Or Muldrotha can have a whole bunch of little stuff to cast. Like, that's really interesting. But I also like what you guys did there, providing a sort of a good basis on like where the averages kind of fall, because I think that's pretty important for us to point out here too. Remember an episode we did way back ago, it was probably over a year and a half ago, it was episode 71, where we observed the changes in data trends over time when we shifted EDHREC to observing the data from the past 2 years, which we did to sort of help keep us a bit more present, a bit more current with the data that we're measuring, so that it doesn't get bogged too much from the past and we can observe more recent trends in data. What we saw on that episode was really fascinating, because we saw that the average converting mana cost of decks across all of EDHREC was trending downward. At that time, we saw it trended downward from 3.51 to 3.39, and that was in about early 2019. Well, we've measured it again now, and things are still getting streamlined. They're still trending downwards. Now the average mana cost above across all of the decks amongst EDHREC, now it's down to 3.33. So things really are streamlining, and that 3.33 is about where average kind of sits for decks' mana curves. So the commanders that we're going to be talking about today are the ones that have much higher than that. Even though, again, it's not going to reach up to 10, it is still going to be a lot higher than the 3.33 that we're seeing.
Now, Joe, you say that a deck with the average CMC it could never be 8, but I hear a lot of listeners taking that as, well, that's just a challenge.
Challenge accepted. That's I can totally get behind that. And Matt, I think that is perfect for you, Mr. Big Green Face Smashy person, to definitely spearhead that type of campaign for sure.
I've already tried. I'll keep up the good work though.
Fantastic. How about we get into it now with all of that laying of the groundwork out of the way, now that we know sort of where the averages are and the types of numbers that we might be seeing. Let's just get into it. We're going to talk about the top 10 commanders that have the highest mana averages. They have the biggest mana curves in the game. Matt, take us to number 10. Who do we got? So
number 10 is Karthus, Tyrant of Jund. So he's starting us off by being a 7 mana commander by himself. So it's a good start, you might say. Karthus is a 4, and then Jund colors legendary dragon, big 7/7 with flying and haste. And when Karthus enters the battlefield, you gain control of all dragons, you untap them, and then all your dragons have haste. So basically, you're kind of insurrectioning for all the other dragons. It's pretty mean. It's pretty nasty. So there's 145 decks for Karthus out there. The average converted mana cost is 4.57. And that seems to be about right when you consider Karthus is all about dragons. And dragons usually, they're not going to cost 2 mana, you might say. They're going to be big. And there's 24 cards in the Karthus deck that have a CMC of 6 or higher.
Well, a little anecdotal comment on that. A few years back, I had built a Lathless Dragon Queen deck, mono red, and it makes dragon tokens whenever you cast a dragon spell. So one of the things I wanted to do with the deck was to play dragons and then bounce them and recast them again. So I wanted really efficient dragons, which meant like 4 and 5 drops. That was considered a really efficient dragon, and like, oh, it's only 4 mana. That's really lean here on the curve in this deck.
Dang it! That's Dana. You would. Sorry, that might sound a little bit catty of me, but no, I'm just like, Dana would try and find 2-drop dragons if he possibly could.
There's a couple bad like dragon whelp kind of ones. Yeah, there's a few.
Yeah, no, Dragon Tribal is definitely, it's never going to be an inexpensive strategy. And actually, if we take a look through we're going through the top 10, but behind the scenes information here, among the top 20, there were some other Dragon Tribal commanders too, like the Dragon, for example. So dragons just in general are very, very expensive. They've got a bunch of cards like Udvara Hellkite, Bladewing the Risen. Those also show up on Karthus' page. So dragons is a very, very high cost strategy for sure. So dragons is a nice base for us to start off with number 10, feeling really good. 4.57 was a really big, average mana cost compared to the average that we were talking about earlier. So if that's where we're starting, it's only going to go up from here. Dana, do you feel comfortable taking us to number 9 and getting us even farther up high this mana curve?
Certainly. Number 9, we have Bosch Iron Golem. Bosch is an 8 mana golem for a 6/7 with trample, and it has 3 and a red. Sacrifice an artifact, and Bosch Iron Golem deals damage equal to the sacrificed artifact's converted mana cost to any target. So there's 253 decks, and the average CMC in the database is 4.61, and it has 22 cards with CMC 6 or more. But there's a lot of them as well that are in the 4 and 5 range. So there's a lot of big numbers in a Bosch Iron Golem deck. And it's mostly artifacts that Bosch is going to sacrifice to throw at people. So cards like Spine of Isha or Metalwork Colossus, Ancient Stone Idol is in there. But even the mana rocks tend to be like expensive mana rocks because they're doing double duty to cast your spells and be a fling option with Bosch. So things like Dreamstone Hedron that maybe don't show up on a lot of decks because it's so expensive is much more useful here than it is somewhere else.
Yeah, I love that observation about Bosch. Like, I think of artifacts as being like really, really cheap because I'm so used to the commanders that can draw cards whenever you cast a bunch of artifacts. You want a bunch of little tiny artifacts, but Bosch is here to be like, nah, they're huge and they hurt. And I love that even the mana rocks can play into that strategy, and it makes me more afraid of artifacts than I already was, if that's possible.
Well, and the commander costing 8 mana doesn't help. Right, it doesn't do your average CMC a lot of good either.
Indeed. And actually, commanders costing 8 mana, I don't know, that might end up being a trend throughout the rest of this episode. In fact, it is a trend for our next commander in the number 8 position. That commander is Slinvoda, the Rising Deep, an 8 mana 8/8 Leviathan, which has a kicker cost of 1 and a blue, so you can pay even more mana for it if you don't want to just spend 8. He says marginally sarcastically. When Slinvoda the Rising Deep enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you bounce all creatures except for merfolk, krakens, leviathans, octopuses, and serpents. And I'm reading the card directly there. I know that the actual word should be octopi, but Magic cards are templated weird.
Technically,
anyway,
Joey, it's octopode.
I don't
think that's right, but
I think it's absolutely correct. So for all the listeners, you now know that the plural of octopus is octopode.
I feel like it's octopi, and now I'm thinking about 3.14.
How about that Slinvoda card, guys?
Dana, the master of destabilization. All right. So yeah, Slin Voda's average CMC that we're seeing across its 100 different decks is 4.61. It has 24 cards that have a mana cost of 6 or higher. So we've got cards like Stormtide Leviathan. We've got cards like Serpent of Yawning Depths, Deep Sea Kraken. It is just a sea monster tribal deck, which obviously fits right in with Slin Voda's strategy. Will the real Slin Voda please stand up? This is a very high cost commander, just like the Dragon Tribal that we were seeing earlier.
Well, all the crack eye, as Dana would probably tell me to say, all the Krakenses. It's not hard to find one that costs 5, 6, 7 mana. So yeah, if your deck is all about balancing everything but those Krakenses, then yeah, go for it. Slin Voda is a good option.
I think it's croak would be the plural of Kraken.
We have absolutely got to be done. Matt, can you please move us on? Take us to number 7 before Dana invents some other strange collective nouns for everything.
I sure can. So Purphoros the Bronze Blooded is number 7 on this list. There's 548 decks, for Purphoros Bronze Blooded. The average converted mana cost is 4.75. That makes a lot of sense, though, when you look at Purphoros as a commander. Obviously has the indestructible and the God Clause, not a creature unless you have a devotion equal to 5. But the activated ability is kind of what Purphoros likes to drill in on. You can pay 2 and a red, put a red creature card or an artifact creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, then you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So it doesn't really matter if the average converted mana cost is 4.75. You're only paying 3 mana anyways to essentially sneak attack those creatures in. 27 cards in the average Purphoros Bronze Blood-Eyed deck. That are going to have a CMC of 6 or more. Joey, I appreciate you giggling at my terrible attempt to continue Dana's joke.
Why do people listen to our podcast? We tell the worst jokes in the world. Oh, no. Okay, I'm out of observations. I might be done for the rest of the podcast based off of this is going. I really enjoy Purphoros as a commander, and I enjoy that all of these mana costs are a little bit deceptive in his case because you're not actually ever paying as much mana as these creatures cost because Purphoros will just do cool sneak attack things instead.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about paying 8 mana because you're just paying 3 mana, and then you're probably doing something with like ending the turn early, maybe making sure you don't actually have to sacrifice those creatures. You're going to do something weird with this deck. It's very exciting. It's not too far off from my sneak attack tribal deck that I have with Vivictus Asmati, which also probably has an average converted mana cost of about 5.5, 6. It's a lot.
I do in fact recall you saying, what's that new card from the set that someone recommended? Oh, it's 6 mana to cast that? That thing's way too low. It needs to be much, much bigger.
It's too cheap.
All right. Speaking of 6, actually, let's take us to number 6.
And number 6 is in a similar vein to Purphoros, and I think we're going to see this trend moving forward. The first 3 decks we looked at here were ones that had high CMC because how the deck is designed. You're encouraged to play things and don't really have a choice in the case of dragons and sea creatures. Well, Purphoros is encouraging you to play high CMCs so you can cheat those costs. And I think we're going to see a few more things like that moving forward, including number 6 here, Mael the Anima. So Mael the Anima is in Naya colors, and she's just 3 to cast, a red, a green, and a white for a elf shaman. And you can spend 3 and Naya, so 6 total, to tap her and look at the top 5 cards of your library. And you may put a creature card with power 5 or greater from among them onto the battlefield, and the rest go to the bottom of your library. So there's 912 Mael decks in our database. The average CMC here is 4.89. So we're encroaching on 5 territory here pretty quickly.
There we are.
27 cards in the deck with CMC 6 or greater, all of which probably have power 5 or greater to meet the requirements for Mael. Signature cards are things like Avacyn and Gisela, some big beater angels, Terastodon. Basically, any ginormous creature is going to find a home in this deck.
If I may do a good impression of Matt when he's playing with us on our stream, twitch.tv/EDHRECast, my big creatures go burr.
They do go burr.
Is that an accurate impression?
But when Mael just does such a good job, you get to choose something off the top of your library, throw it on the battlefield, No strings attached. You might actually remember on twitch.tv/EDHRECast, Corbin Hostler came on, played a Mael the Animal deck, and I would wager that his average CMC was right around this 4.89 that we are seeing along with the other decks on the website.
What I find especially interesting about a commander like Mael is that the low ramp spells like a Farseek or maybe even Signets if Mael deigns to use them, those smaller mana cost ramp spells are not dragging the mana cost down all that much. Or if they are, that's just a testament to really how many huge creatures she's playing to have a good enough density of them for her ability to be reliable in actually finding one off of the top of her library.
Well, because for every 2-drop Arcane Signet that you have, even if you average that out with the 7-drop Angel that you're going to flip into play, I mean, that still puts it at the average CMC of 4.5. So, I mean, even if you're just doing a 50-50 split with those low CMC ramp spells with the big CMC beaters, you're still going to have a pretty significant number.
Mael also costs 6 to activate versus the sneak attack on Perforos. You know, you don't have to be running something ginormous necessarily to get pretty good value out of Perforos. When you're spending 6 on Mael, you probably don't want to be running things that cost 6 to cast. You probably want to be running things that cost 9 or 10 or 12 or something to really get the maximum value. So that probably makes a big swing in this CMC as well.
Yeah, I could totally see it. All right, let's move on now. We're going to number 5. Our number 5 was a curious one, I think. It's Demon Lord Belzenlock. That's the 6-mana, 6/6 Elder Demon with Flying and Trample. And when it enters the battlefield, you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card and then put that card into your hand. If the card's converted mana cost is 4 or greater, you repeat this process, and Demon Lord Belzenlock deals 1 damage to you for each card put into your hand this way. About 118 decks to Demon Lord Belzenlock's name here, and the average converted mana cost that we're seeing bumping ever so slightly higher is 4.93. I was surprised to see this one at first because it had been a long time since I thought about Demon Lord Belzenlock, but at the same time, this commander's ability is directly dedicated to playing really big creatures, so it wants to have a whole lot of, not creatures, just really big cards. It wants big mana costs so that it can use that ability to find even more cards to get into hand. Notably, there are only 14 cards in the deck that have a mana cost of 6 or higher, which sounds like a far cry from the 27s and the 28s and stuff that we were talking about with other commanders. But if we look at the converted mana cost of 5 slot, for example, Demon Lord Belzenlock runs an average of 13 cards that cost 5 mana. Or if we look at the converted mana cost 4 slot, for example, he runs 16 cards on average that have a mana cost of 4. So there is a lot of crowding, especially in the middle section for Belzenlock, that is giving him such high numbers.
Yeah, with some of the other decks, like Mael, for example, you're probably wanting to run relatively lean ramp spells since you're going to be spending so much money on her ability or, fairly efficient removal spells, things like that. That isn't the case with Belzenlock necessarily because you can hit anything off the ability. So a removal spell like Snuff Out that has a high CMC on the card is much more useful in this kind of deck than it would be somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's totally the kind of stuff that we see on this commander's page. Snuff Out, Unmask. They have these alternate casting costs so they can be cast for cheap, but they're still within his ability range. And that makes it really, really cool. And I'm just glad to be reminded of this awesome demon bro because demons are awesome and playing black is awesome. And I feel like Matt is giving me some side eye because he thinks that the big creatures are way more awesomer. So I think, Matt, what I'll do is pass it off to you. Can you tell us quickly about our number 4?
So the next one we have coming up is continuing that kind of trend of cheating things into play like Dana was talking about. Only this one, you don't pay mana at all. There's no activation cost to it. Instead, it's symmetrical. So that commander is going to be Braids Conjurer Adept. Braids is 4 mana, so 2 blue for a 2/2 human wizard. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player may put an artifact, creature, or land card from their hand onto the battlefield. So no activated abilities, you gotta pay 0, just at the cost of giving everybody else some big nasty things maybe. So there's 528 decks for Braids Conjurer Adept out there. Average converted mana cost of 4.96. Oh, so close to that 5 CMC threshold, whatever you want to call it. 27 cards have a CMC of 6 or greater in the average Braids Conjurer Adept deck. So you can cheat in some pretty nasty things like, say a Jin-Gitaxias if you're Joey and so cruel to the rest of the table. Scourge of Fleets if you just want to do some big Kraken Eye things to the table. It's a pretty nifty looking deck.
I'm happy DJ of Jumbo Commander noises. That's all I can think right now. It's just like
pretty much.
the signature deck right here. And it's great too, because this is a commander that is really, assuming you've constructed it correctly, is going to take advantage of that ability way more often than anyone else is going to be able to do. So you will cheat in way more threatening stuff than anyone else can.
Yeah, I think this is another example of a situation too where you are rewarded for playing the largest things you possibly can. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's a 5-drop or a 14-drop. You're still putting it in play for free, so why not take advantage of that and play the biggest, meanest things you can?
Very much indeed. All right, so that brings us to our top 3. But before we get to our top 3 of the commanders that have the biggest average converted mana costs, the craziest mana curves, we're going to take a brief pause and challenge some stats. It's our favorite segment here on the EDHRECast because there's a lot of data on EDHREC, but we don't always agree with it. Sometimes we think the cards are seeing too much play, and sometimes they're seeing too little play. So what we like to do is challenge those stats to give some credit to them, where sometimes they don't always deserve it, or sometimes they deserve more. I don't know. I'm sort of rambling now. Dana, take us to your challenge. What you got this week?
So my challenge is a relatively new card. And it actually is in more decks than I thought. It's in 3,500 decks. It's just a card that I very rarely see, and I still think 3,500 is relatively low for how impactful it is. And that's Vona's Hunger from back in the Ixalan block. It's an instant for 2 and a black, and it says each opponent sacrifices a creature, and if you have the city's blessing, instead each opponent sacrifices half the creatures they control, rounded up. The city's blessing is relatively easy to get in Commander, but even if you don't have it, 3 mana for an instant speed, forcing everyone to sacrifice 1 creature is almost always still really good. And if you're casting it on turn 5, it was the point in the game when you usually have the city's blessing. That can be devastating sometimes. And for how efficient it is and how almost always useful it is, I think it should be in more than just 3,500 decks.
This would go great alongside decks that want to play Soul Shatter, which is a recent challenge of mine.
Also a really, really good card.
Yeah, just super great. Like, if you're looking for extra copies of Crackling Doom effects, I do love this card.
I love so much that you guys are finally subscribing to the Mono Black, make everyone sacrifice all of their stuff train, like I've been trying to get you to do for nigh 140 episodes now.
I'm not doing it for you. I choose my cards for me, not for Joey.
I will point out, too, the instant speed is a really big deal. Instant speed is always good, but it's especially good in this kind of effect because you have a situation where you're not sure if, like, do I want to cast this right now? And then someone goes to put a weak creature in play. You can just, before it resolves, sneak this in quick to get the value before they have the obvious sack fodder in play to sacrifice to this. So that makes a big deal.
Also really great for Mazarek Kral Death Priest, who gets even bigger when other people sacrifice stuff. It's really, really awesome, and it makes me very, very happy indeed. I'm going to move on to my challenge now. Mine is a bit of a weird one, but it is something that I actually have some personal experience with. I've mentioned before, probably tons of times on the podcast, that my entire family plays Magic, and my mom has just recently built a new Flyers deck. And initially, we went with Ineaz the Gale Force to get that flying tribal, but she has since switched over to the new Kangi, the Sky Warden, to just get some very straightforward beatdown. While we were in the process of building the Ineaz deck together, though, we really ran into some speed bumps with the card 9 Lives, which is showing up on really high percentage points for Ineaz on her page. 9 Lives is that enchantment with Hexproof. It's like a 3-mana thing from M21 that can put counters on it instead of letting you take damage, but if it gets too many counters, then it will kill you, which is a dangerous thing. And the point of it is to synergize with Ineaz's ability in this deck, where Ineaz can give permanents away so that these negative effects from the 9 Lives card would instead be dealt to your opponents. The problem is that in our experience, among playing with my family, the little we've been able to do during quarantine times and playing virtual EDH and stuff, giving stuff away with Ineaz is just not super reliable is the problem. It's actually kind of tough to trigger, and the more important point for that is to use a Grasp of Fate or a Darksteel Mutation and give those away. Play a Gravitational Shift and maybe give that away, but actually trying to set up a situation where you give away a negative permanent to another person with Ineaz's ability just didn't seem super reliable, and it kind of just ended up being a dead card. So 9 lives, 41% of Ineaz decks. I'm gonna challenge you there. I don't think you should rely too much on Ineaz's giving stuff away ability. Instead, Matt, I'll kind of compare it to your Vivictus Asmati. It's not always about setting up the top of your deck to find something to cheat into play with Vivictus Asmati's ability. Sometimes with Ineaz too, it's just about chaos warping other people's stuff. It's just about destabilizing other people's stuff with Ineaz, and I feel the same way about Vivictus. So that's, I think, where you should focus on a little bit more there with regards to this particular challenge.
Yeah, if I get to cheat something big and nasty and to play with Vivictus' ability, that's just gravy. Managing the board is always a little bit more important with pretty much any deck, but I do like this pick on those grounds just of you want to do something that you can do reliably, and 9 lives probably isn't the most reliable thing you can be doing. So that is a good pick.
All right, let's move it to yours now.
Well, my pick comes courtesy of a patron, friend of the podcast, Josh Swope. We were having a conversation on Twitter earlier today, and Josh brought up a very interesting card in a situation that I hadn't really thought of. And now that I look at it more, it's more and more appealing. That card is Inspiring Statuary. That is a 3-mana artifact and just says non-artifact spells you have improvise, which means basically you can tap any given artifacts that are on your battlefield to kind of help you pay for it. It's kind of like Convoke, only with artifacts is the best way that I can explain it. But where Inspiring Statuary should be popping up more in is in equipment decks. We were talking about old Akiri, but new Akiri as well. Any equipment-heavy decks are going to love this because you can still tap those equipments that you have on the battlefield to help pay those improvised costs on your commanders. Say, Valduk does get removed from the battlefield quite a bit. Being able to tap my equipments on the battlefield to pay that commander tax is a pretty awesome ability. Also, one thing that I didn't really think of until I thought about it more was that it lets you save your mana from your lands to pay those equipment costs because you tapped all the artifacts on your battlefield that aren't normally mana rocks. It basically makes, in equipment decks, all those equipments that you have on the battlefield into mana rocks, which is an insanely powerful ability because that is one of the biggest shortcomings of, say, a Boros deck might have is mana efficiency. Balin's one of the only real cards that cheats mana cost, so this helps get into that territory of you're skirting around what normally would have been a mana restriction and turning that into a bonus. Inspiring Statuary shows up nowhere. It's not on the equipment theme page, it's not on Saram's page, not on Akiri's, not on Valduk's. It's nowhere. It's only in 3,500 decks currently. Not very many at all. People need to be playing this more, especially in decks that kind of get mana hungry. I may put it in Valduk because I like the card, but I'm just never going to be able to find a spot for it. I think Josh Swope, awesome patron of the podcast, has helped me find.
Very nice. Yeah, I'm looking through the page for it now, and it really is showing up in stuff like Jorver, Weatherlight Captain, or Kozilek the Great Distortion, for example, which that's also a cool place for it, but they're not really focusing on the equipment like you just mentioned there. So equipment, really great synergy with that. Super on board.
Yeah, it was a fantastic find. So thanks, Josh, for helping us all out.
All right, so I want to move back into our main topic, and I actually just mentioned the card Kozilek the Great Distortion. And remember how we made happy DJ of Jumbo Commander noises earlier? Well, we're about to make happy Ashlyn Rose noises now, because we're moving to our top 3. And full confession, the top 3 is kind of a bit of a cheat, but this is when we finally pushed past that CMC average of 5, and things got a little bit crazy because literally all of the Eldrazi commanders, the Ulamogs, the Kozileks, the Emrakul, showed up in this particular space. And we didn't want to drown things out with 5 of the slots belonging to Eldrazi. We wanted to condense it down into 1. So our number 3 pick is all the Eldrazi commanders because they cost like 10 mana, they cost like 11 mana, they cost like 12 mana, they cost a whole bunch of mana, and they all play each other in their decks too. They have a huge density of really expensive creatures and really expensive Eldrazi and really expensive mana rocks and just really expensive everything. All of them average about 27 or so cards with CMC of 6 or greater among all of their average decks. Really, really crazy. And it ranges from like a average mana cost of like 5 to 5.32. So they're really pushing that envelope up into some very high mana costs indeed.
Yeah, well, and especially codes like the Great Distortion, where you're able to discard all of your cards to counter spells. You want a diverse array, and if you want to counter that, Selvala Stampede, you got to have a 6-drop in hand. Otherwise, Matt's going to get a whole bunch of value from that. So yeah, the thing that surprises me with this, though, is how tightly knit they all are. Like, they're almost all going to be carbon copies. And obviously, there's going to be some flavor mixed in there. But how close these all were without any other commanders finding a way in between, the bottom here and the top Eldrazi commander here.
Yeah, I think really just the limited card pool available to a colorless deck causes so much homogeneity between each of these lists. They physically can't look too different from each other because there's only so many cards for them to choose from.
Yeah.
Right, and the cards you're choosing from tend to be also other Eldrazi in addition to each other, where something like Oblivion Sower as a 6-drop is really cheap and efficient.
Right.
So I mean, there's just almost no choice with this kind of a deck. You just have to run giant creatures, and we're north of 5 for all 4.
Right.
Which is fascinating to think about. We talk about the average CMC of decks going down. That is not at all the case with these Eldrazi decks, which are really good decks. Like these, I've played against multiple different variants on this, and that CMC is not indicative of them being really casual or really weak or anything.
No.
They're really strong decks given how high those numbers are.
What didn't they just also get Forsaken Monument from the Zendikar set too? Yeah. Like a mana doubling thing for their colorless lands? Like, despite having high mana costs, they cast things efficiently, and it is terrifying every time that they do. Eldrazi might also make a recurring appearance, don't you think, Dana, for our number 2 commander coming up here in the number 2 slot as we go even higher among this mana cost journey. Who we got at number 2?
Number 2, we have Joyra of the Gitu. 1 and blue and red, 3 mana total for a human wizard. And Joyra's ability here says you can spend 2 and exile a non-land card from your hand, put 4 time counters on the exiled card, and if it doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. So it's another variant kind of on Purphoros, but instead of sneak attacking it into play and then sacrificing it, you're suspending it and having it then get cast for nothing in 4 turns.
Yep.
So the deck tends to run giant creatures, oftentimes Eldrazi, things of that nature, that you can spend 2 mana on to just exile, and then 4 turns later, surprise Emrakul.
Right. Well, not too much of a surprise because we do see it coming in the suspend. But yeah, her page is full of Eldrazi and cards like Amanatu's Augury and Eldrazi, and then stuff like Decree of Annihilation that you can also suspend. And then, there's some more Eldrazi. So yeah, very big stuff. If you're going to pay time instead of mana, you want the mana that you're cheating to be as big as it can be cheated.
Yeah, and we're looking at an average CMC here of 5.32 and 30 cards north of 6 CMC. 30. That's crazy.
Well, Dana, I can do you one better, actually.
Okay.
Because we do have one more commander left to talk on this list.
We do.
A converted mana cost on the average of 5.55 with 32 cards north or at the CMC level of 6. It's Jodah, Archmage Eternal. So that is the allegedly Jeskai commander. Don't let people tell you otherwise, though. But for 1 in Jeskai colors, you get a 4/3 human wizard with flying. Okay. But you can pay Wooburg, that is a white mana, blue, a black, a red, and a green, rather than pay the mana cost for spells that you cast. So that kind of lends itself to casting more big, crazy, powerful Eldrazi, but also cards like Omniscience and Progenitus sneak their way into this Jodah deck, because why pay, 10 mana when you can just pay 5? Just half the cost of Progenitus, guys, with Jodah Archmage Eternal.
So insane. The ultimatums are another interesting find on Jodah's page, too.
Yep.
Just all of those, like the Mardu ultimatum that destroys all of the stuff your opponents control. There's no mana restriction on these necessarily. It's just the 5 mana. You got your Fist of Suns commander who just lets you pay 5 simple mana. All you have to do is make 5 mana, and you don't have to worry about strenuous mana costs or exacerbated, high CMC cards. It's just 5. It's an Omniscience for 5 mana.
Who would have thought that Wooburg was an easier converted mana cost to pay than some of the spells that you happen to find in a Jodah deck? But turns out just getting 1 of every color is a lot easier than whatever the ultimatums require.
Yeah, and man, that average CMC, the average curve of 5.55, that is the cap. That's the range that we're dealing with here. That's really, really crazy high. And I feel like it takes a lot to actually push it up to that level, actually, looking at all of the stuff on Jodah's page. So, man, that's high, and I just really hope that you got enough ramp.
Enough ramp and enough fixing, man. It's a very mana intensive deck, like having to pay exactly Wooburg every time to cheat something into play. Right. It's specific.
It really is. So we just looked through the commanders, comparing and contrasting their average CMC across all of the cards in their deck, but there's actually some other fun information that we kind of wanted to go through too. When we looked at the commanders that have the greatest number of a certain CMC card slot, basically, rather than just going by their average, because there are some commanders where the average was quite high, but a lot of it was condensed there in the middle, or their average was quite high, but that's because the top end was high and then it was kind of balanced out by a bunch of cards at the low end as well. But if we just kind of look at some of the commanders that have the greatest number of, let's say, 10 drops, for example, well, we actually got to see that Joyra of the Gitu has the most number of 10 drops. Or when you looked at, and this is the one that I'm really eager to talk about, the commanders that have the most 9 drops in their deck. Joda did show up there again with 6 9-drops in his deck, but so did Yannette. Yannette had 5 9-drops in her deck because she loves to play really awesome stuff like Void Winnower. There's been way too many Eldrazi in this episode, I think. But y'all, I really enjoy playing Yannette and then flipping a Void Winnower 9 CMC off the top and casting it for free and preventing you guys from doing anything to me. It's great.
Well, you know what? There's another commander on this list that has quite a few 8-drops that you don't have to do anything either. So you can just do Kali of the Vast, just sneak everything into play. Don't have to worry about casting any of these big, expensive 8-drop demons or dragons or angels or whatever you're putting into that deck. There's 5 8-drops in the average Kalia deck, and that's tops among 8-drops.
She does love her some Avacyn. She really, really does.
Avacyns, some Runescar demons, and all sorts of just big, crazy things.
Very much. Commanders with the most 7-drops, there's actually kind of a tie there too. And it's all the stuff that we talked about earlier. Joda, Kalia, Perforos, the Bronze-Blooded all showed up there, having 11 7-drops in their deck each, which is just like, okay, whoa. And another fun thing came up with some dragons when we started looking at the commanders that have the most 6-drops. We saw Karthus earlier when we talked at the number 10. Karthus has 12 6-drops in his deck, but so does Intet the Dreamer, which is the Temur dragon that can play stuff off the top of its deck for free too. So Intet is also playing a pretty healthy number of cards that it can probably cast pretty regularly, but that also feel really great to cheat into play if you can. And Dana, do you think you could tell us about the commanders that run the most 4-drops and 5-drops?
We would still be here when the next set rolls around in January and we lose our whole vacation. So I'm just gonna blow past that and say there's too many to go into in the 4 and 5-drop slots.
It was a large way tie. We can simply put it that way.
It's a large way tie. Who wrote that script? Was it me?
Also, though, hilariously, this one's just an extra fun thing that I kind of noticed, because when we're talking about all of the high CMC, for each of these commanders, I kind of wanted to take a look at, what's happening at the low end as well. And hilariously, I was able to find 2 commanders who, on average, only play 1 card at the low end, 1 card with a converted mana cost of 1. And we all know which card that would be. There's, the card that has a converted mana cost of 1 that everyone plays in their decks. It's Sol Ring. So there are 2 commanders here where the only 1-drop that they play is a Sol Ring. And those commanders are both Sultai. They're Yarok the Desecrated and Kadena Slinking Sorcerer. So aside from Sol Ring, those commanders play no other 1-drops. And you know what? I just thought that was kind of funny. They're not among the top 10 for the highest, the highest mana curves and stuff like that, but they do still apparently. They don't like 1-drops very much now, do they?
No, they definitely do not. I was a little surprised to see those 2 on the list of all things, too. Would not have been what I would have guessed.
Me either. So this was a bunch of fun to go over the biggest and the punchiest and the hugest of the cards in EDH. But guys, I kind of want to get if you have any final thoughts about big spells and high mana curves in EDH. Dana, do you have any other thoughts about like the viability of playing them, for example? I know that I've heard plenty of other shows talk about, can you still play these really expensive cards, or do you have to be, a little bit more careful about that? And just how, we talked earlier at the beginning of the show, how mana costs are trending downward. Kind of just want to take your temperature about how you feel about high cost cards in Commander nowadays.
I think you can still play them. I think you need to be a little bit judicious about how many of those things you run. I just built a mono black deck, for example, and I was looking for board wipes, and I wanted to run Decree of Pain. which is, an 8 mana to cast. Well, if I'm going to run Decree of Pain, I don't want something like Inguruk's Wake. I don't want 2 board wipes that cost 8 mana, or probably 2 cards in general that cost 8 mana. But I'm okay with having 1 or 2 of those in a deck. A couple 6 and 7 drops as well. I don't think you have to be too focused on only running things that are super, super low.
See, you're just speaking all the things against what I built in my most recent deck, my Vivictus Asmati deck, which is like the curve starts at 4. So, but
I think that's a good point, though. Like I do think I say that, but I have a Sphinx tribal deck that's just under 4 average CMC. In part, number one, because Sphinxes tend to be very expensive. Sphinges, excuse me, that's the plural of Sphinx is Sphinge. With a G.
No.
So that's part of the issue there. But the deck is also kind of a control deck. It's running a lot of removal, quite a few counter spells that slows the game up, not a painful amount, but enough where it's not nearly as bad to cast those things. So you absolutely can run those higher CMC things in the right deck if your play style is built and adjusted to doing so.
Well, and like you said, Dana, you're playing your big expensive Sphinxes in a control deck that you want to get the game out to a point. Sphinges, yes, excuse me. But in my Vivictus deck, like I'm playing Sneak Attack and Perforos Bronze-Blooded, cards that let me cheat around the mana cost.
You bet.
And so that's how I kind of justify it. And just because, that deck just makes me so happy on all the timiest of levels. So just depending on what the deck is, like you can still find ways to build decks with all these high CMC. As that's kind of why we went over this whole list of commanders anyways, because there are commanders that still are doing it and doing it well, and they're fun, efficient decks. And it's weird to think of a deck as efficient while also having a CMC average of 5 or more. So finding ways to skirt those CMCs is something that decks can do.
I would also say you don't want to get probably too hung up on the exact numbers here.
Yes, definitely.
There's situations where you're playing a Gruul deck that's running a Gulf to Primal Hunger and the Great Hinge and Blasphemous Act, all of which have really high CMCs. Except they don't. Like, you're casting Gulta for 2 mana, and you're casting Blasphemous Act for 1 or 2 mana generally, and you're casting the Great Henge for a couple mana. So yes, on paper, those have really high CMCs, and they may make your deck look like it's at a 3.5 or something, but the reality is it's probably closer to a, high 3.3H or something in that range. So, don't fixate too much on your exact numbers because there's a lot of fluidity in there. Similarly, you might have a deck that's running a bunch of X spells. That you're like, oh, my deck's, sitting at 2.5. Well, it's really not, because you're not casting those where X is 0 very often. Very frequently, you're casting X as, 4, 5, 6, or even more. So I would just say, realize those numbers aren't necessarily exact numbers.
Very much. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I can't remember the last time that I cast Cyclonic Rift for 2 mana, for example. I don't tend to play that on turn 2, even when I do cast it for 2 mana. So that's also a thing to be aware of, is where things actually fall in your mana curve is really something that you want to be very cognizant of. And actually, if you are arranging your deck out and you want to try and figure out what your mana curve is supposed to be, put the cards in the slot where you're actually going to pay as much mana for them realistically, and not just whatever their mana cost says on the top right-hand side.
Yeah, that's a good tip, is when building the deck, and if you're a visual person laying everything out, put those X spells into, okay, well, I'm going to assume the average CMC of this is going to be 6. So put it in that spot just so that you're mentally thinking of it as a 6 CMC spell instead of just a 1 or 2, because like you said, Joey, you're never casting X for 0.
No. I think, too, that there's one other point that I kind of want to bring up here as well. So sort of our understanding about mana curves does tend to be that they kind of are a bell curve that crowds up in the center, especially around the 3 or the 4 drop slot. It tends to be where we see a lot of the cards sort of gather up when we are organizing our decks. We don't have a whole bunch of 1 drops. We don't have a bazillion 9 drops or 8 drops or anything, but we do have a lot sort of in the middle. And it's a fun thing to sort of discover sometimes. And maybe this is because I play so many necromancy decks that I discover it as easily as I do, but I've got plenty of decks where it doesn't look like a bell curve when I set things up. It actually is kind of wonky or inverted in some cases. I've got Yannette, for example, that doesn't have as much crowding in the center because I'm really focusing on those big high drops, and so I actually have a lot more on the low end instead. Or I've got the Mimeoplasm, who wants to have a whole bunch of really expensive stuff to cheat back into play that I'm never actually casting with any of my mana. So it's just kind of a fun thing to sort of discover there too, is that the shape of a mana curve can also be completely different from deck to deck there as well, and there's no correct quote-unquote way to have a mana curve distributed.
Well, next week's show, we're going to look at the opposite of this, the decks with the lowest CMC, so we can see if there's anything interesting we can pull out of that information as well.
Yeah, indeed. Tune in next week. We'll be talking about all of those commanders that have the lowest curves instead of these big, huge, swingy ones, so we'll see what we can uncover. It should be a good time. With that, though, what I think we need to do is call this episode to a close. Fellas, if any of our listeners would like to get in touch with us, where is it that they can find you all? Matt?
So you can find me on the Twitters at Mathimus55, that's MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, Wednesday evenings, we are streaming twitch.tv/EDHRECast. Come in, watch some paper games being played over the internets. It's a wild world we live in, so we're just trying to bring a little more paper magic to it.
And Dana.
You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can hear me once a week on my other podcast, CMDR Central. You can read my articles at EDHREC, and you can find all of us at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And I'm Joey Schultz. You can find me on Twitter at Joseph M. Schultz, and you can find the cast on Twitter or on Facebook at EDHRECast. Plus, if you have a question, you can contact us at edhrecast@gmail.com. Our thanks go out again to Josh Lequai and the entire team at the Command Zone podcast who handle all of the post-production work on our podcast too. And of course, our thanks to our sponsors, that's TCG Player and CardKingdom.com. You can find them using the price info links on EDHREC or by visiting CardKingdom.com/EDHREC, and that shows your support for the show. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.